The people, right, once they were moved out of their crofts, and what did they do then?
Well, the point was they took them away from where they had vast areas of hill grazing, and they stuck them on top of cliffs, basically, like at Bad Bay is the classic place where there was a wall, and they lived on the cliff side of the wall, and the children had, on a windy day, had to be tethered. This is in Caithness, so they wouldn't blow over the cliff. Yeah. But they did it, and they built the houses, and they survived, and the men were then set originally to go down to the seashore, wade into that sea, up to their chests with hooks, and drag out seaweed for the kelp industry. That water comes from the Arctic.
So
I mean, we have the Gulf Stream, but
it was the kelp before fishing.
The original thing, they had thought it would be good if they could learn to be fishermen because the sea was teeming with fish at that time. If they had asked the people themselves, they would have said, "Oh, wait a minute, we don't need to go out in a boat. All we need to do is sit on a rock, you scatter breadcrumbs on the sea, and you had a net which was in a circular, which has disappeared off there, it should be over there somewhere, that the actual, called an Ave, and it was like a butterfly net, actually, a big butterfly net. And you scooped it down into the water, and you scooped up what they called the cuddies, young saithe, a young fish about that size. And if you spent a couple of days, you could fill 5 barrels of this with salt, and you could feed your family all winter from that, without ever going on the sea.
The fishing was for food as opposed to for selling?
No, they wanted for selling.
For selling, right.
So the whole point of the clearances is that these people were self-sufficient. Yes, there were bad years, but these were bad years over the whole of Western Europe. The peasants in Spain, the peasants in Germany were suffering because of a bad summer when it rained over the whole of Western Europe. And they always cast this up and say, well, these people were just living like animals and they were totally at the mercy of the weather. So, and we think we are not at the mercy of the weather, but as events are causing that to change. So they were set to, eventually the kelp industry collapsed, it was for glass. They were making potash for the glass industry. And they found other ways of doing that, and they didn't want seaweed for that anymore. Which is probably a mercy, because not only were these men trying to build houses out of what was lying about, look after their families, the only way they could earn any money was by wading into the sea. Hypothermia, how, day after day, their health would not be good. So then they said, okay, well, you can learn to become fishermen. Now, they certainly were great soldiers. Very few of them were sailors. They were cattle herders and horse rearers, and they were out in the hills. And as it says, many never set foot in a boat. So they had to get a boat like this. Now, this is what in Caithness they call a stroma yawl, and here they call them a scoo. Scoo, it's a Gaelic old name, and basically, but it might well have been made on stroma because they were mass producing them there at that time in Caithness. And it's a round-shaped boat. Originally, they would probably have been leather boats, actually, to have the coracle kind of idea, but this is now with planks. And you can actually see they've enlarged it. They've put more planks. People have come in and said, yes, look, they've raised it there. It would have had a sail on a flat bit there at the front, which they didn't only use when there was a strong wind coming from the right direction. It would have been about 6 men in it with oars. And it's a working platform. And what happens is it bobs up and down in the swell underneath the cliffs, and you've got lobster pots or nets to catch herring, and they pay that out, and then the nets would obviously have fish in them, or they would have a long line with hooks. And the children and the women would sit up at 4 in the morning and bait those hooks and attach them to the line. And if you got the hook in your finger, it had to be cut out with a knife because you would get blood poisoning. Everything to do with this was absolutely, totally dangerous.
And again, the women and children played a
They were right in there. I mean, the children were proud. You know, this is a meal on the plate. This is them being useful. And the other thing which people, when they had got one of these boats, whether the estate, it was like the Hudson Bay Company, they would rent these things out, and timbers for their house were rented out. Having burnt the timbers which they then had to pay for the rest of their lives for timber given by the estate.
Did they become any good, any good at fishing?
They became brilliant. This is the other thing, they were extremely enterprising. Only the young men that did this, that the old guys would be out there helping to build the house and look after children and all the rest of it. The young men, gung-ho, right, we'll go for it. They were used to the water, having been living up to their necks in it just about. But terrible accidents. That's a rocky coast, storms blow up, appalling accidents, most of which not recorded. But even Seller himself admitted they'd become as good sailors and fishermen as any in the world.